That night, I learned a painful lesson about freedom, and its price was just $1. Since childhood, I had grown used to enduring control and injustice in my own home. But that day, when my mom and stepfather ordered me to serve his arrogant son like a servant, I said, no. That single word was met with the sting of a leather belt and insults that cut deep into my mind. I walked away with nothing but a single dollar in my pocket, and a plan they never saw coming. Before we dive in, I'd love to know, what time is it where you are? And where are you listening from? Leave a comment and hit that subscribe button so you won't miss any of the dramatic stories ahead. Now, let's see where today's story will take us. Are you ready? Hi, I'm Mia. I've lived in Willow Creek, Georgia, my whole life. Around here, folks love to say, family is everything. They'll preach it at Sunday service, stick it on their fridge magnets, and carve it into wood signs hanging over their front doors. But for me, that phrase didn't feel like a blessing. It felt like a cage. When I was 12, my mom, Linda, remarried. Hank Reynolds was his name. Big man, heavy boots, a voice rough as gravel after a rain. He owned Reynolds Supplies, the hardware store everyone in town went to. If your fence was busted or your sink was leaking, you ended up at Hank's counter sooner or later. He had a son too, Dylan, 8 years old, with a mop of blonde hair and a smirk that never seemed to go away. From the moment they moved in, I stopped being Mia and started being the girl they took in. Hank liked to remind me of it. You're lucky we keep you here, he'd say, like I was some stray dog he could toss back on the street whenever he felt like it. At first, I thought maybe it was just going to take time, that we'd all figure each other out. But no, every day, my place in the family became clearer, and it was nowhere near equal to Dylan's. I stocked shelves at the store after school, lugging 50-pound boxes of nails, paint cans that left my arms aching. No paycheck, no, thanks, just the expectation that I'd keep going. Meanwhile, Dylan was too young to help, but somehow never too young to boss me around. The worst was dinner. That was where Hank liked to draw the lines, where Linda's silence said more than words ever could. I still remember one night like it's etched into my bones. I'd been at the store all afternoon, stacking lumber, sweeping aisles. My hands were raw from breaking down cardboard. I came home to the smell of Linda's reheated meatloaf. She didn't even make it fresh anymore. Just popped it in the oven and called it good. I set the table nice, because I thought maybe if I did everything right, I could avoid a blow up. Dylan plopped down, eyes glued to his phone, and barked, "Milk, no, please." No glance in my direction. I got it for him. Kept my voice calm. Hank grunted from the head of the table. He likes it cold, so I dropped a couple of ice cubes in the glass. Dylan looked up just long enough to spill it, on purpose, and smirk. Oops. I bent to clean it, knees pressing into that sticky linoleum floor. Linda didn't even look up from her phone. I sat back down, and just as my fork hovered over my plate, Linda said, "Dylan eats first. You know the rules. Serve the boy." My stomach was growling so loud I could feel it in my ears. "I'm starving too," I said quietly. That was the wrong thing to say. Hank froze, eyes narrowing. What did she say? Dylan snickered. "She thinks she's equal." Hank slammed his fist on the table. "You serve, or you don't eat." I stood, but when Dylan barked for more bread, I couldn't do it anymore. I said, "He can pour his own milk and get his own bread. I'm not his maid." The room went dead quiet. Hank pushed back his chair slow. Real slow. The scrape of it across the floor made my skin crawl. He unbuckled his belt, that soft leather whisper that says you're about to regret this. "Repeat that," he said. I didn't. I just stood there, heart pounding, but my eyes didn't drop. The first lash landed on my arm, hot, sharp pain that made me gasp. I stumbled back, but Linda stepped forward, grabbing my chin so hard her nails dug into my skin. "You obey, or you're out, ungrateful brat." 2 more strikes, one across my shoulder, one down my side, and I was done. They shoved me toward the front door. I was barefoot, wearing pajama shorts and an old t-shirt. I grabbed my hoodie from the hook without even thinking about it. Hank shoved a crumpled $5 bill into my hand like it was a favor. "Go see how far that gets you." The porch light flickered overhead as I stepped into the cool night air. They closed the door behind me. No call to stop. No, come back in. Nothing. Just that buzzing light and the sound of my own breathing. My arm throbbed where the belt had landed. each heartbeat making the pain flare hotter. I walked down the street, not even sure where I was going. The houses were dark except for a few with the warm glow of TVs inside. I could smell someone's barbecue still faint in the air, a reminder of the dinners I wasn't having. My bare feet stung on the rough pavement, so I cut across the grass when I could, moving toward the edge of town where the street lamps got sparser. Under one flickering bulb, I stopped. The cool metal of the lamppost against my back was grounding, even though the night air made me shiver. "I'm not nothing," I whispered. I said it again, louder this time, like maybe if I repeated it enough, I'd believe it. My mind went to that old paint set I'd found in the store attic a few weeks ago, hidden behind boxes of dusty holiday decorations no one touched. The brushes were worn, the colors faded, but the moment I opened that box, something in me stirred. I'd started sketching in secret, using scraps of paper from the store. I drew what I couldn't say out loud, shadows shaped like people who towered over a small figure. Storm clouds pressing down, dark swirls that looked a lot like the ache in my chest. Nobody knew, nobody cared to look, and maybe that was the point. It was mine, my hidden fire, standing there in the cold. I didn't know how long I'd be gone or where I'd end up. I just knew I couldn't go back. I couldn't keep pretending their version of family was normal. And I had no idea yet that this small, stubborn ember inside me, the one I kept tucked away in paint and paper, was going to be the thing that saved me. I used to think that if I kept my head down, didn't make waves, and worked hard enough, life would eventually ease up. Turns out, some people see quiet as weakness, an invitation to pile more weight on your shoulders just to see if you'll break. By the time January rolled in, the wind cut through the thin walls of the diner like it was made of paper. Evelyn, the manager, wasn't exactly what you'd call warm. If the coffee wasn't poured fast enough or the silverware wasn't polished just right, she'd let you know, and not in a subtle way. I remember one morning, she stood so close I could smell her peppermint gum as she hissed, "You're lucky to even have this job. Mia, don't get sloppy." I wanted to tell her that I'd been up since 4 a.m. shoveling snow just to get my car out. But I just swallowed it down. My quiet was my armor, even if it didn't look like it. But for every Evelyn in the world, there's a Josiah. He was this tall, lanky busboy with an easy grin, maybe 22 at most. He had this way of sliding me the better coffee pot before the breakfast rush, or quietly grabbing a tray when he saw my hands trembling from carrying too many plates. Once, when I was short on change for the laundromat, he just slipped a quarter into my palm and walked away like it was nothing. Those little moments, they didn't erase the hard parts, but they reminded me I wasn't invisible. Clara was another one. She worked the register, all soft cardigans and silver hair pinned back with a pearl clip. She'd sometimes wrap an extra muffin in a napkin and hand it to me with this knowing look, like she saw more than I was saying. For later, she'd murmur, and I'd slip it into my bag, pretending it was no big deal even though it meant skipping hunger that night. Still, most days felt like an uphill climb. My rent was late more often than not, and the landlord's knocks got sharper. I kept my painting supplies tucked under my bed in a shoebox, brushes worn down to frayed edges, tubes of paint so squeezed they looked like crumpled toothpaste. I painted at night, after my shift, when the apartment was quiet except for the hum of the radiator. There was something about the way the brush moved across the canvas that steadied me. Each stroke felt like writing in a diary no one else could read. The deep blues were my exhaustion. The flicks of yellow were the hope I didn't dare say out loud. Sometimes, I'd paint a figure with their back turned, shoulders hunched. Other times, just hands, calloused, reaching, holding on to something unseen. My art wasn't pretty in the traditional sense, but it was honest. Every canvas was a conversation I couldn't have in real life. One night, I caught myself whispering to the painting as I worked, "You're the only one I can tell." And it wasn't even strange, it felt safe. Then came the Saturday at the flea market. I didn't even plan to sell anything that day. I'd gone with Josiah, who was hunting for old vinyl records, and I just tagged along for the walk. But halfway through, I spotted this little folding table with a sign that said, "Local artists welcome." The guy running it, mid-30s, paint on his jeans, hands stained with charcoal, was chatting with someone about oil textures. On impulse, I asked, "How does it work?" He told me anyone could put their work out for the day for a small cut of the sale. I almost laughed. Who would buy my stuff? But my heart was racing in that strange, reckless way it does when you're standing on the edge of something new. The next Saturday, I showed up with one small canvas wrapped in brown paper. It was a piece I'd done late one night, just a chair in an empty room. Sunlight spilling through the blinds. To me, it was about waiting, about the space between what you hope for and what actually shows up. I set it on the table and tried to look casual, like I wasn't emotionally naked in public. I kept circling the market, pretending to browse old teacups and paperback novels. But my eyes kept flicking back. That's when I saw her. She was maybe in her 50s, wearing a thick red scarf and leather gloves. She stopped at my canvas, tilted her head, and leaned in closer. I could tell she wasn't just glancing, she was looking. Really looking. My stomach twisted. She asked the table guy something, and he picked up the little card with my price, $30. I'd chosen that number because it felt both too much and too little at the same time. She nodded, pulled out her wallet. I swear, my ears started ringing. The guy handed me the cash a few minutes later. Nice work, he said simply. But it wasn't just the money, it was the fact that someone, a stranger, saw what I made and thought it was worth keeping. I walked home with the $30 in my pocket, and it felt heavier than any paycheck. I kept picturing that red scarf, those gloved hands holding my canvas. Where would she hang it? Would she see what I saw? Or something entirely different? That night, as I rinsed my brushes in a chipped mug, I caught myself smiling, not a big, triumphant smile, more like the quiet kind you give yourself when you realize there might be a way forward you hadn't considered. I didn't suddenly believe I was destined for galleries or fame, but for the first time in a long time, the idea of what if felt less like a cruel joke and more like an open door. And that, for me, was enough to keep going. Even Evelyn's sharp voice the next morning couldn't take it away. I just kept thinking, someone out there has my painting hanging on their wall right now. That thought was mine, and she couldn't touch it. The morning of the Willow Creek Art Fair dawned cool and bright. The streets already lined with rows of white tents. The air buzzed with chatter. The smell of kettle corn and fresh-baked pretzels drifting between booths. Mia stood in the shadow of Josiah's stand, her hands clutching the worn strap of her satchel, feeling the rhythmic thud of her heartbeat against her ribs. It wasn't just nerves, it was the weight of knowing that somewhere out there, Hank and Linda might walk these same aisles. Josiah was already busy arranging his frames, giving her a quick glance. "You ready?" he asked. "As ready as I'll ever be," Mia murmured, her voice dry. Clara slipped in beside her, pressing a warm coffee cup into her palm. "Drink, and remember, your art speaks louder than anything you could ever say." The crowd thickened as the day went on. Children darted between displays, couples strolled arm in arm, and older folks leaned in close to examine the finer details of pottery and jewelry. Mia's small corner was modest, just a simple easel, a few smaller pieces lined up along the edge, and one large, covered canvas in the center. The cover was intentional. Josiah had insisted on it. Make them curious before you make them listen, he'd told her. From her seat, Mia could hear fragments of conversation. Who's the new artist? Never seen her work before. That's a big piece. Wonder what's under the cloth. The murmurs swelled when a familiar deep laugh cut through the air. Hank. She spotted him instantly, his broad frame, crisp button-up, and that same self-assured gait. Linda was on his arm, smiling like the fair was her personal stage. They didn't notice her at first, but the second Hank's gaze swept toward the covered painting, his step slowed. Something flickered in his expression. Recognition? Curiosity? Maybe both. Afternoon. Hank greeted Josiah in that oily tone that could charm anyone who didn't know better. What have you got here? Josiah didn't answer immediately. He glanced at Mia. This was her moment. Her knees felt like they might give, but she stepped forward. I do, Mia said, her voice steady despite the pounding in her chest. It's mine. Hank's eyebrows rose in mock surprise. Well, look who's been keeping busy. Linda tilted her head, eyes narrowing like she was scanning for weaknesses. With a slow, deliberate motion, Mia took hold of the cloth and pulled it away. The painting stared back at them all, bold strokes, layered textures, a blend of shadow and light that seemed to pulse with something raw and unfiltered. The title was scrawled at the bottom in careful lettering, The Day They Shut the Door. The scene was unmistakable to anyone who knew her story, a narrow hallway. Light spilling through a crack. The silhouette of a girl standing alone as a door closed in her face. Silence rippled through the crowd. That's, Hank started, but his words faltered. Mia met his gaze, refusing to look away. It's the truth, she said simply. A woman in the crowd gasped. A man muttered, powerful. Conversations sparked, quiet at first, then growing. People leaned in, studying every detail, pointing, asking questions. Hank's jaw tightened. Linda's lips pressed into a thin, disapproving line. They exchanged a glance, one part irritation, one part discomfort, before turning away without another word. Mia let them walk. For once, she didn't need to chase their approval or explain herself. The painting had done the talking. The air around her shifted. People began approaching, asking about her work, where they could see more. Among them was a tall woman with a press badge clipped to her blouse. Flipping through a leather-bound notebook. You have a remarkable voice in your art, the woman said, handing Mia a card. I scout for the Willow Creek School of the Arts Scholarship Program. We're always looking for talent that tells a story. Mia stared at the card, the words almost not sinking in. A scholarship? To cover tuition, materials, mentorship, the works, the scout explained with a smile. If you're interested, we can set up a portfolio review next week. For a heartbeat, Mia couldn't speak. The hum of the fair faded. All she could feel was the swell of something warm and unfamiliar, possibility. Clara's hand found her shoulder. Told you, she whispered, your art speaks louder than anything else. Mia closed her fingers around the card. This time, she didn't doubt herself. This time, the door wasn't shutting. It was opening. The offer sat on the table like a fragile glass bird, beautiful, delicate, and almost impossible to believe was real. The scholarship scout's card rested between Mia's paint-stained fingers, the embossed lettering catching the light of the fair's fading afternoon sun. Around her, the crowd had begun to thin, their footsteps crunching over the gravel as laughter and conversation faded into the distance. Josiah's hand rested gently on her shoulder. You don't have to decide now, he said softly, though there was a glint of hope in his eyes. Clara, standing just beside him, didn't even try to hide her smile. But you should think about it. Mia, this isn't just a door, it's a whole hallway. Mia's mind spun. A scholarship, formal training, a studio space she wouldn't have to share with the smell of stale coffee and laundry detergent. But then, Hank's face flashed in her mind. The tight, controlled anger in his jaw at the fair. Linda's sharp hiss of disapproval. They weren't just mad, they were wounded, or at least their pride was. And she knew the retaliation that might follow. Back at the apartment that night, she found herself staring at the scholarship form on the table. It looked too clean for her messy little space. She thought of the life she knew, working odd jobs, painting in stolen hours, trying not to bump into Hank's shadow in town. It was safe in its familiarity, even if it was small. The offer was different. It was wide, open, unpredictable. She reached for a brush. That night, her canvas became a battlefield. The first sweep of color was bold and sharp, deep crimson, anger at every slammed door. Every time she'd been told she wasn't enough. Then came the cooler tones. Steady strokes of pale blue and white, traces of Clara's gentle encouragement. Josiah's quiet belief. The painting told the story she couldn't say out loud. A woman at the edge of a cliff. The world spread out before her. The wind tugging at her clothes, daring her to leap. By morning, the decision was no clearer. But the painting was alive. The following week, the small-town gossip wheel spun faster than she'd ever seen. People she'd barely spoken to before the fair now stopped her in the grocery aisle, asking about her work, congratulating her, even buying small prints she'd made to pay the rent. But not everyone was warm. Hank's truck passed her twice in one day, slow enough for her to feel the weight of his stare. Linda's cousin, accidentally, spilled coffee near her display at the weekly farmer's market. It was subtle, but it was a warning. Don't get too big for your boots. Josiah caught her one afternoon, frowning as he helped her load canvases into her car. You can't let them shrink you down, Mia. If you let their bitterness decide your path, you'll be walking in circles your whole life. Clara nodded firmly. You don't owe them smallness. Mia swallowed. But what if leaving? What if it makes everything worse? Worse for who? Josiah's voice was calm, but it cut right through. 2 nights later, the scout called. I know this is a big decision, he said. We're finalizing the list of accepted artists. If you want in, I need your answer by Friday. She promised she'd call back. Then she hung up and sat in silence. The hum of her small refrigerator the only sound. Friday. That gave her 2 days to wrestle with a lifetime of fear. She decided to paint again. This time, she didn't think, she just let the brush move. Harsh, jagged strokes mixed with softer, deliberate curves. Every time she hesitated, she forced her hand to keep going. The result was a messy, raw piece, half-finished, imperfect, and yet, honest. She realized she had been painting her choice the whole time. The left side of the canvas was dark, closed off, all shadow. The right was messy, bright, unformed. It scared her, but it also thrilled her. Friday morning, she walked into Josiah's shop. "I'm doing it," she said, voice steady despite her racing heart. Josiah's grin was wide enough to break the tension in the air. Clara clapped her hands together. "Then we're celebrating tonight." That evening, she called the scout and gave her answer. When she hung up, she felt something strange, like air filling her lungs for the first time in years. The fear didn't vanish, but it wasn't the one in control anymore. The months that followed were a whirlwind. She packed up her small apartment, selling what she could, storing the rest in Josiah's back room. Hank didn't come by, though she heard from neighbors that his pride had taken a serious hit. Linda was quieter, which was almost more unsettling than her sharp remarks. But Mia didn't let it stop her. She had a start date, a city to move to, and a scholarship that felt like a miracle she'd somehow earned. On her last night in town, Josiah and Clara threw a small gathering in the shop. Friends from the market came. Neighbors brought pies, and someone even brought a bottle of wine that looked far too expensive for the crowd. In the corner, her latest painting sat on an easel, The Leap, the cliffside woman now stepping forward. Caught in motion, when the night wound down, Clara hugged her tightly. "You're not running away, Mia, you're running toward." Josiah simply said, "Don't look back too much. Just enough to remember how far you've come." The morning she left, the town looked the same as it always had, narrow streets, faded shop signs, the slow rhythm of a place that didn't rush for anyone. But to Mia, it all looked different, not smaller, just behind her. As the bus pulled away, she rested her head against the window. Her reflection blurred with the passing scenery. She thought of every brushstroke that had carried her here, every whispered doubt she'd painted over. And for the first time, the unknown ahead didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a canvas. The scholarship offer sat in Mia's lap like a fragile glass ornament, beautiful, but terrifying to touch. Josiah and Clara were buzzing with excitement. Yet Mia's mind swirled with questions that refused to settle. Art school in the city. A chance to step into a world she had only glimpsed through magazines and rare museum trips. But it also meant leaving the safety of the small apartment, the scent of Clara's cinnamon tea, and the sound of Josiah's soft guitar in the evenings. And what about Hank and Linda? Would they see this as her triumph, or simply as her walking away without a fight? That night, Mia sat by her easel, staring at the half-finished canvas. It was a portrait, not of a person, but of a door cracked open, light spilling into the dark. She didn't realize until that moment that she had been painting her own hesitation. Each brushstroke was both an invitation and a warning. She dipped her brush into a deep blue, tracing the shadow along the doorframe, and whispered to herself, "If I don't step through, I'll never know what's on the other side." The next day, she met with the scout again, a woman named Evelyn Gray. Sharp-eyed but warm-voiced, Evelyn laid out the details: full tuition, living stipend, mentorship from established artists. It was the kind of opportunity people waited years for. Still, Mia's voice trembled when she said, "I've never lived anywhere but here." Evelyn smiled gently. "Then maybe it's time you found out where else you can belong." When Mia told Josiah and Clara, Josiah clasped her hands. "You were never meant to stay in one frame, Mia, you're a whole gallery." Clara hugged her so tightly that Mia felt the older woman's heartbeat. The hardest part was packing. Not because she owned much, just a small suitcase of clothes, a box of paints, and a stack of canvases, but because each item felt like a thread tying her to this life. The night before she left, she went for a walk past the old streets, the flea market where it had all started, the corner cafe where she sometimes sketched people through the window. The city lights in the distance seemed closer than ever, as if they were calling her name. The train station smelled of rain and steel. Josiah carried her suitcase. Clara tucked a paper bag of sandwiches into her backpack, just in case. Before boarding, Mia saw Hank standing near the edge of the platform. He wasn't alone. Linda was there too. Her posture stiff, eyes flicking anywhere but Mia's face. For a moment, Mia almost kept walking, but then Hank stepped forward. His voice was rough. I saw your painting at the fair, the door one. I get it now. Linda muttered something under her breath, but Mia couldn't catch it. Mia nodded slowly. I didn't paint it for you, but I'm glad you saw it. Hank swallowed hard. Good luck, Mia. It wasn't an apology. Not really, but it was the closest thing she'd get. And strangely, it was enough. The train pulled away, and with every mile, Mia felt a weight loosen. The skyline grew taller, the streets busier, the air charged with possibility. She arrived at a dorm room that smelled of fresh paint and possibility. Classes were intense: color theory, anatomy, art history, but Mia thrived. Each night, she poured herself into new canvases, her brush capturing not just images but the life she was finally living. The city was exhausting and exhilarating all at once, but for the first time, she felt she was painting in full color, not just shades of survival. Months later, her first student exhibition opened. Evelyn stood beside her as visitors stopped in front of her work. And there, in the center of the room, hung the painting she had finished the night she decided to leave, The Open Door. A man paused in front of it and whispered to his companion. You can feel the courage in it. Mia smiled. Because courage, she now knew, wasn't a sudden burst of strength, it was the quiet, stubborn choice to step forward, even when your hands trembled. And that choice had changed everything. Sometimes, life tests us in ways we never expect, through betrayal, silence, or unfairness that cuts deep. Yet, it is in these trials that we often discover who we truly are. As the saying goes, true gold fears no fire. Standing up against injustice is rarely easy, but staying silent in the face of wrong can cost us far more: our dignity, our peace, our sense of self-worth. Breaking free from toxic relationships and old prejudices is not just about leaving the pain behind. It's about walking toward a life where your voice matters, where your worth is not determined by others' approval, and where fairness and respect are non-negotiable. Remember, you reap what you sow, and planting seeds of courage, compassion, and truth will grow a life you can stand tall in. If this story touched something in your heart, I'd love to hear your thoughts or experiences in the comments. Like this video if it spoke to you, and subscribe so you won't miss more heartfelt stories like this. Wherever you are, I wish you peace after every storm, strength for every trial, and the quiet joy of knowing you've stayed true to yourself.